Now we are going to get started in just a few moments with our very special presentation by Dr. Amanda Kennell, Fluttering Across the Pages of Manga History. And I'm very excited about this because manga is something I'm sorely lacking in knowledge about. So I'm very excited to learn all about this today. And as Amanda said on her blog, and geek out a little bit about this cool art form. Stop my screen share here. My name is Heather. I'll be your host today. I'm also the chairwoman of the Senior Common Room Curators, the ladies who bring you these events every single month. And you know what? I should give them a little shout out by name. I don't do that often enough. We've got Ellie Schaefer-Salins, Dana Noon, Claire Imholtz, April Lynn James, and Linda Cassady. And I definitely depend on them for their sage counsel. So I appreciate all the support, ladies. Now, I hope you were paying attention to that slideshow because we have some very exciting events coming up. We've got our calendar scheduled through June. And just so you know, if you're ever wondering, hey, what's coming up? You can always go to the website, lewiscarroll.org/events. As soon as I know something's happening, you'll know what's happening. I put it right up there. So then you don't have to, go scrolling through your email or searching through our Facebook page. Although, of course, that's a good place to learn about all our events as well as all our social media, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. So, little Zoom housekeeping per usual. The chat is for you all to say hello to each other, and I see everyone is doing that all across the world. Fantastic. The Q&A feature is there for you to submit questions for Amanda. And remember, you don't have to wait until the end of the presentation. You can just add those in whenever you think of them, and I will collect them and present them to Amanda at the very end. All right. Let's get to our speaker, why don't we? Amanda Kennell is currently an assistant teaching professor of international studies at North Carolina State University. Her first book, this is so exciting, Alice in Japanese Wonderlands, will be published by the University of Hawai'i Press later this year. And to earn her Ph.D., her dissertation happened to be on Alice in Evasion, which examined the vast variety of Japanese adaptations of Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland novels. Go figure. Welcome, Amanda. And there she is. Hi, we are so happy to welcome you here today. I know a lot of you know Amanda from previous Lewis Carroll Society of North America events, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but she will also be appearing in person at USC at long last in April for an Alice in Japan conference that everyone is welcome to. So hop on a plane and get here to Southern California. All right, you can get started whenever you're ready, Amanda.
All right. So, as I think is fairly well known, there are quite a few Japanese adaptations of Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland novels. And in particular for manga, Shinichi Kinoshita and I already published an article in the fall 2021 issue of Night Letter about manga. I don't want to sort of go over that material too closely. But in this presentation, rather, I thought I'd try to give the perspective from Japan and Japanese culture, and in particular, Japanese manga. Why is this a thing, really? Why are there so many Alice manga, and why are so many very prominent artists creating them? This draws on my forthcoming book, Alice in Japanese Wonderlands, which we've just finalized the cover for. You can see on the cover, there's actually a picture from a full-color manga of Alice by Sakura Kinoshita, which is very gorgeous. I'm not going to talk too much about it today. But through this presentation, first I'll talk a little bit about manga history, the manga industry, and why there are so many manga. Then I'll go through some of the prominent artists. And if we have time at the end, I'm just going to sneak in a quick discussion of some of the key genres of Alice manga specifically. So, Alice manga, there are a few, right? This is not even the majority of the Alice manga that I currently have on the screen. There are a ton of these manga, and the reasons for that relate in part to the manga industry and how it developed, but in part also to just how wonderful Alice is for adapting into manga. I feel like this audience already understands the second part of that and why Alice is so wonderful, which is why here I'm going to focus a little bit on just a short history of manga and the manga industry. And I'm going to really go back even before the beginning of the manga industry to 1868. Japan had been pursuing, or I should say, the Japanese government had been pursuing a policy of isolationism from other countries for several hundred years, and suddenly in 1868, it comes to an end. The response to this in Japan, or I should say as part of the end of this, Japan and the Japanese people intentionally start importing everything that they can from these countries that they had known about, but had been holding themselves separate from for quite a while. This means that there is the sudden mass of translations appearing on the market, and in turn, artists and authors are very inspired by the new techniques, new strategies, styles, genres that they come across. In turn, scholars date this to different points, which is why I have a bit of a range here, but between the late 1800s and the 1930s, depending on who you ask, we see the emergence of modern manga, which is to say manga that you would look at and go, oh yeah, that seems like what I would expect to see from a manga, rather than just sort of earlier pictures that were kind of funny, but you wouldn't look at them and say, oh yeah, this is connected to Sailor Moon. Of course it is. Alongside this, there is a push to educate girls in Japan, and this is part of opening the country up to foreign knowledge, foreign ways. They start seeing that girls go to schools and are educated to or in the sorts of things boys were educated in to a higher level than they had seen previously in Japan. So you start setting up girls' schools in Japan, and within these girls' schools, which have just girls in them, because they're not going to get too crazy here with this female education thing right off the bat. But you see the emergence of something that we call girls' culture. Girls' culture is utterly fascinating. It becomes a sort of way of pushing back against strictures that still existed in Japan, against women's ability to move around in public, hold down jobs, speak out on political matters, all of that stuff. They do it by creating a very inward-focused culture. And a lot of this, of the ability to move through girls' culture comes from citing and adapting the works of girls' culture. So if you want to prove that you really understand and you really are a member of girls' culture, well, you have to know the key works, not of like classical Japanese literature. No, you need to know the key works of Japanese girls' culture. And in saying them, in referring to them, maybe taking a nickname that refers to one of them yourself, that is how you show that you really belong. And this becomes something that girls who are not even in the girls' schools can get involved in through magazines over time. Now, this brings us to right after the end of World War II. As you can imagine, during the height of World War II, between censorship and materials shortages, there was, let's say, fairly focused and limited production in Japanese cultural or culture-related media. But at the end of the war, especially with the occupation forces bringing in all of these, again, new to them materials, just like we had seen in the late 19th century to the 1930s, suddenly you start seeing all of this new innovation in terms of genre. And in particular, we see this with superhero comics and superhero TV shows. At the same time, manga is not remunerative at all. And if you are interested, there's an artist named Mizuki Shigeru. He really made his name with this fantastical story about a little demon boy that went on for many years. But he also wrote a very well-researched sort of half history, half memoir of his life. And that includes this time period where he details things like manga artists who starve to death because they aren't earning enough money, even though they're working like dogs, really. This means, in turn, that manga artists really get pushed to find extra lines of income. So you start seeing, for example, the Batman TV show from America come to Japan, very popular. So they hire a Japanese artist to do not exactly a spin-off manga. He does his own Batman manga that just happens to be released around the same time as the show. This kind of production of manga that is tied to the production of other media is going to become a huge thing. We eventually start calling it media mix. And in the 1980s, these media mix practices come to dominate Japanese media industries. We see it from a variety of examples and sort of formats or models, whether it's something like having a manga launch at the same time as a new TV show, or whether it's something like having a girls' manga magazine that, just wraps up a little toy or present with each new edition of the magazine. Now, from the 1980s on, in addition to the media mix practices coming to dominate Japanese media industries, we also have a boom of new media, starting with, good old video cassette, right? There's something called doujinshi, which are fan-made comics. These very often adapt already serialized, professionally made comics, anime and other media. But these come to be a huge, huge market in Japan. And it becomes a launching pad for new manga artists, some of whom I'll be talking about later today. Over time, with the growth of the internet, we see things like digital manga coming along, new online platforms that are cheaper, but also platforms that basically make it more possible to adapt your favorite series into your own series or to refer to something quite quickly within your work, as well as light novels and various other media that start booming and just proliferating across Japanese culture. When we get to the 1990s, there is further a global boom in anime and other Japanese popular media that sort of underlines, let's say, material that speaks to people from other countries and underlines the global nature of any kind of cultural reference. All of these added up create a manga industry that has some specific hallmarks. First, manga are serialized first before they are put together in single volumes. Serialization drives tight turnaround times, and it can become very difficult for an artist to keep moving a plot forward without ever needing, just a break to think through how exactly to manage the next story arc. This can mean that sometimes you have kind of what we think of as filler stories, sort of side stories that are often quite humorous, and that can often be used as excuses to incorporate a little bit of adaptation, as when Oran High School Host Club just took one chapter, which doesn't really connect with the rest of the series at all. But in that one chapter, the series characters sort of enact Alice in Wonderland. They don't do it that well, or specifically their female character who should play Alice, she's not very Alice-like. So they start replacing her with other characters just to get through the various parts of the story that she wouldn't really do, until suddenly it turns into a wild free-for-all. And it's a fabulous story, but it's one whole chapter in this longer running series that probably provided a bit of a breather for an artist who was stuck with these very tight turnaround times. The manga industry is also marked by fan service. by which I mean giving out of extra stuff. It's not uncommon for magazines that serialize manga to just sort of get wrapped in plastic and have a little game or a poster included in the manga or the magazine. It's also not uncommon that when the various chapters of a manga are collected into a paperback version, the artist may draw additional pictures to go in between different chapters. These kinds of extras are a perfect opportunity for example, an artist who is writing and creating for girls to show their knowledge of things that are common and canonical in girls' culture by just having a little bit of an Alice theme here or there. As this kind of suggests, citation and adaptation within manga as a proof of expertise is really key in a lot of cases, not just for girls' culture, but in particular for products aimed at girls and women. Further, because manga still, it's very hard to earn a living off of manga, and it's a very hard lifestyle. So it's basically vital for a manga artist to, before they have written a single word, before they've drawn a single image, they have to plan for the adaptation of their manga into other media so that they can earn extra money from that. That's the route toward being a successful manga artist. So I just want to give you one example of what I mean. This is from a long-running series. It's called This is the Police Station in Front of Kameari Park in Katsushika Ward. It's an incredibly long title. In Japanese, it's Kochira Katsushikaku Kameari Koen Mae Hashutsujo. Everyone just calls it Kochi Kame. It is a sort of slice of life series of just, police officers going through their daily trials in this not very high crime neighborhood. As you can see in this picture, it looks rather dramatic, but the problem is that somebody showed up late to work. That's all. This series ran for 40 years. And I think on the 30th anniversary, they did a series of chapters where they basically adapted the Kochikame crew with various other manga. For example, you might know this guy, whose name is Son Goku, from the very popular series Dragon Ball. Also a very fantastical series, Dragon Ball. It makes no sense to put those characters in the very realist Kochikame series. But this is kind of how manga work. It's part of the system that on occasion you just have a complete fantasy chapter, and it doesn't really mess with the overall series in any way. Everyone accepts it as a fun thing, but because it's all serialized, they just go back right to the normal serialization. This is what Matthew Penny has called the malleability of manga, that you can do this and it doesn't bother the overall work at all. Another example comes from Koriyuki and her Kane series, or Count Kane series. This is an interesting one. I'll talk about in a little bit more depth because Koriyuki has adapted Alice in Wonderland multiple times in this series alone. And you'll note that there are different titles on these books. That's because when I say Count Kane series, I'm looking at the collective of works that Yuki has made featuring Count Kane, as he is called, or more appropriately, Earl Kane. But when Yuki started the series, she didn't realize that it should be Count or Earl instead of Count. So we tend to call it Count Kane. But her different series, some of them just run for one volume, like the top left one, which was initially published under the title Forgotten Juliet. Then some of them are run for 2 volumes, like the next one, The Seal of the Red Ram, where you see part 1 here, and then it has part 2. And then the whole series series of Count Kane books and series ends with the 6-volume Godchild series. Now, this series is about a young Englishman, a nobleman, Count Kane, with a penchant for poisons and an interest in solving mysteries and murders. He lives in Victorian England, and it's a little fantastical where he is, but otherwise it's fairly what you might expect based on having read a bunch of stuff about Victorian England, ranging from Jack the Ripper to Japonism, spiritualism to Alice in Wonderland. Count Kane manga relayed multi-layered tales adapted from news items and fictional works that circulated in England during Queen Victoria's reign. Alice's first appearance in Count Kane is just a brief reference. It's brought up in a poem that ends The Seal of the Red Ram, Part 1. The next volume doesn't really take that up at first, but when you get to the end of the volume, the final chapter is a story called Elizabeth in the Mirror, or Kagami no Naka no Elizabeth. In this chapter, it's a standalone story. Kane is attempting to help a pair of twin girls, both of whom are named Elizabeth. One of the twins explicitly invokes Alice on multiple occasions to describe her thoughts. In one example, she says, "I wish I could enter the mirror one day and play with Beth there, like Alice in Wonderland." This is not, however, the only adaptation in this chapter. Snow White and Cinderella are also referenced. These three are all common works in Japanese girls' culture, and that is the market that Yuki is aiming at. And in fact, Yuki herself was once a girl, of course. The reason that she is adapting Alice, Snow White, and Cinderella here is that she's specifically taking the sections of those stories that relate to lost girls who might need rescue by, say, Count Kane. In consequence, when Kane attempts to rescue the girl, the lost girl, it seems like it's a necessary and even heroic thing. It really, puffs him up as an important protagonist, when in fact he ultimately kind of leaves a pile of bodies in his wake and he doesn't really save anybody. Kane's uselessness is really a very amusing thing to say, but it really heightens the drama of the series, the way he adapts Alice, or the way Yuki adapts Alice here. And in fact, the title of the chapter is a really interesting sort of foreshadowing of Kane's uselessness. It's Elizabeth in the Mirror in English, but in Japanese, it's Kagami no Naka no Elizabeth. That is Elizabeth in the middle of the mirror. Now, the Japanese translation of Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Found There is Kagami no Kuni no Aris, which is sort of like, if we put Elizabeth in there, it would be Elizabeth in the country of the mirror. By switching out country for middle, it's kind of saying, oh yeah, she's never leaving. She's in the mirror because she's just the remaining twins' reflection, not because she is on a journey like Alice. Now, a couple years later, Yuki returns to Count Kane with the story Mad Tea Party that adapts Alice in a totally different way. In this story, unfortunately, there have been some girls who just got decapitated, as one does in Victorian England. And Kane wants to find out why. The girls in question are named Lorena and Edith, in a reference or a citation of the three little girls, Lorena, Edith, and Alice, who gave Alice the name. And they were decapitated by a man who wore a mask in the shape of a white rabbit. In addition to the White Rabbit and Mad Tea Party title references, as well as the reference to all three of the little sisters, we see a variety of other references and adaptations and ties to Alice and the larger scheme of Caroliana in this chapter. At the story's denouement, Kane reveals that there had been such a violent argument at a previous tea party that one of the girls had killed one of the others, and that her father drugged them, made them forget, and then proceeded to kill the other girls while wearing the White Rabbit mask to cover up his daughter's crime. As you can see, there's distinctly different attempts at adapting Alice here, and they don't connect from one volume to the next, one series to the next. This is a hallmark of Koriyuki's work. She has overall adapted Alice, I think, at least a dozen times. My number might be a bit off there, but it's very common in her work. And I say that it's in her blog on a regular basis. It's in various art books that she releases, as well as in her manga. But in addition to Godchild, she has adapted Alice in this series, Angel Sanctuary. You saw the image here on the right at the beginning of my presentation. She obviously did the series Alice in Murderland, which I think the connection doesn't need any explanation. She adapted Alice into another series, Grand Guignol Orchestra, in a way that is quite subtle and not apparent at all, as the series appears to be about zombies initially. And there are zombies, but there's also Alice. And she's done a number of single chapter adaptations, including this one that I put down. This is sort of like the Kochikame or police station example that I showed earlier. This is from a book that was written by, or I should say an anthology, that was created in celebration of another long-running series called Parasite. Yuki and various other authors created various works, just single chapter series in the Parasite world. But Yuki further brings in Alice in her work. So she's bringing it in even when she's talking to people outside of her sort of target girls audience. And in fact, if you can read Japanese, you can see that even within this celebration of Parasite, the little sort of spiky circle at the top left of that picture has a advertisement for Alice in Murderland. So they're even using Parasite to draw people back to her main Alice series. Okay, so I know I said I wasn't going to retread the ground of my earlier article with Shinichi Kinoshita too much, but I did think it was worth going over some of the basics. So we see the first Alice manga in 1951, Hiroshi Nakamura's masterpiece manga, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which is a fairly straightforward retelling of the Alice's Adventures story. We move beyond Carroll's plots in 1963 with Koremitsu Maetani's Robot in Wonderland, which sort of, it's one chapter in a long-running story, and much like the Neo-Parasite F chapter by Koriyuki, this takes the series' main characters, the robot, and just retells Alice in Wonderland. In 1974, we see a pair of series, Natsuno Kiyohara's To Alice and Me and Shinji Wada's Stumbler in the Cabbage, that between them sort of add additional levels of complication and really move beyond Lewis Carroll's plotting. In To Alice and Me, we actually see a sort of romantic triangle drama that has Alice as a sort of long-running motif and background. Almost a tool to advance the romance, really. While Stumbler in the Cabbage has a few characters enacting a journey through a cabbagey sort of wonderland, but also meeting Alice Little and really knowing who she is and recognizing her, so they understand this wonderland. They're seeing it through the eyes of people who already also know about the books. And this is the first time it happens, but definitely not the last. From this point on, we see a free-for-all for Alice in manga. So I'm going to go through quite a few elite manga artists and try to explain sort of the importance of their various contributions, aside from Alice, and why it's interesting that they've worked on Alice. For all of them, Alice adds something to their careers. And actually, even the title is a bit misleading. As I said, manga as a medium is one that depends on adaptation into other media for making money. It's not the only medium like that in Japan today. A lot of popular media really require adaptation to make money. So some of these artists that I'm going to discuss are actually really prominent in other media, but were drawn to create manga, and specifically Alice manga, for various reasons. So the first artist I wanted to discuss is Yumiko Igarashi. You see here her best known work, Candy Candy, which ran from 1975 to 1979. This is actually one of the reasons it's prominent today, unfortunately, is because of a lawsuit over who owns the rights to it. Igarashi owns, I think now 50% of the rights to it, shared with the author Kyoko Mizuki. But it was a smash hit in its day. It's basically a massive soap opera about a very nice orphan poor orphan, of course, who goes through really dramatic events, unsustainably, unrealistically dramatic events. This series won the Kodansha Manga Award, and it was adapted into anime that was popular throughout the world. And she also incidentally adapted Alice, just to adapt Alice's adventures specifically. Akira Otomo, you may already know from his manga and really record-breaking, genre-changing film Akira. The manga ran from 1982 to 1990. It sold millions of copies, and in fact, the magazine in which it was serialized, the number of copies they sold on a weekly basis went up by 500,000 during Akira's run. It was wildly popular. It's been incredibly influential in the science fiction genre. It won the Kodansha Manga Award. It won the Harvey Award and the Eisner Award. So those are all, Harvey and Eisner are non-Japanese comics awards. And he adapted Alice for one chapter in an anthology volume called Hansel and Gretel. Keiko Takemiya was really just a massively important person in manga history and in Japanese culture more widely. She turned over time to being not just a manga artist, but also being a professor, and eventually became the president of Kyoto Seika University, which has a very strong manga program. But before that, she's part of something called the Year 24 group. This is a group of female artists who came to basically are seen as developing this world of girls manga. Girls' culture started with magazines and illustrated stories, but not manga. It moved into manga after World War II. And Takemiya in particular, but other members of the Year 24 group as well, really added so much depth to what could be done and what was being done for young female readers in Japan. Some of her major series include The Song of the Wind in the Trees, Toward the Terra and Andromeda stories. She's won the Seiyun Award, which is a Japanese science fiction award. It's incredibly prominent, but also the Shogakukan Manga Award, the Avon Achievement Award, the Japan Cartoonist Association's Minister of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology Award, and the Japanese government honored her with a Medal of Honor with purple ribbon. So she adapts Alice in Fly Me to the Moon, as you see on the screen. And one thing that particularly interests me is that she was part of a collective of female artists who put out Alice Book 1 and Alice Book 2. Now, the chapter that she contributed to Alice, to these books, it's not about Alice in particular, but this group drew on the name of Alice specifically to create a book that they put together and funded on their own, because they felt that they were facing a lot of restrictions from male editors on their artistic freedom, and they wanted the opportunity to try different things. So they drew on Alice specifically for that purpose. And this becomes sort of part of why we see so many Alice manga, especially coming out of girls' culture. Alice is part of the girls' cultural canon in Japan. And it's absolutely, referring to it, citing it is definitely a marker of knowing what you're about, but also it becomes or can become a marker of, a statement of independence from patriarchal pressures of various kinds. Moving on to Mamoru Oshii. This is the first artist I wanted to mention. He's not really a manga artist. He's an anime director, best known for Ghost in the Shell. He's also done a whole number of other important films, including Urusei Yatsura 2, Beautiful Dreamer, Pat Labor 2. He co-wrote and co-directed the first ever original video animation, thinking in terms of the creation of new media in Japan. That was back in 1983. He's been nominated for the Palme d'Or from the Cannes Film Festival. And he won the Nihon SF Taisho Award, which is a major science fiction award. He also wrote Toro no Tsumari, In the End, illustrated by Yuji Moriyama. This is another work that adapts Alice in a sort of fantastical, superpowered kind of way. Waki Yamato is a fascinating personality. She is best known for the series Asaki Yumemishi. I'm afraid I can't translate that one for you because we just use the Japanese name for it. The reason being that it is actually classical Japanese. This is the tale of Genji, made into comics, and Yamato really sort of re-energized Genji for several new generations at this point through it. But when she wasn't doing that, she created a series called a manga called Fusuma Land 4.5 in 1984. And you can see here Alice in the tree, and I believe that's the Cheshire Cat down below. Hideo Azuma is an innovator in the sense of a genre called lolicon, which is basically about cute girls. And you can see that in his depiction of Alice here in the tree. In his series Heartbeat Alice from 1984 to 1985. I think it's also worth taking a look at his series Disappearance Diary, though. This is a memoir that he wrote about his struggles with alcoholism and how he simply one day had a breakdown and walked out of his life. It's very moving, and also is really the work he is best known for internationally, where sort of occasionally somewhat erotic pictures of cute girls in manga is not always as well received as it is in Japan. Now, Kyoko Okazaki, whose name is not unfortunately popping up right now, also goes the more erotic route. But I wanted to include her here. She too, like Takemiya, pushed forward the bounds of what female audiences, or what was being created for female audiences in Japan, with a variety of stories, including Pink. Alice is not adapted in Pink in the sense that it's a major part of the story. It is rather one of only 5 books that the protagonist claims to have ever read. She thinks that these are the 5 best books, and they stand in direct contrast to these sort of highfalutin literary ideas of her love interest, a budding novelist. At the sort of climax of the story's plot, it turns out that actually the Alice-loving protagonist, who everybody thought was so incredibly shallow, well, she has the secret to literary success. Moving on to Yun Koga. Yun Koga began as a doujinshi artist. And actually, I think we've got, Yun Koga began as a doujinshi artist, which is to say she was started off making these fan-made adaptations of other Japanese comics. She is best known for her series Earthian, which is sort of one of the early works and one of the early major works in the boys' love genre, which ran from 1988 to 1994. She also adapted a series called Little Women into Wakakusa Monogatari, which is the stories of young grass, it's called. It's the common name for Little Women in Japan. And then she did Alice in Wonderland, or Alice in Wonderland, from 1989 to 1982. Eiji Otsuka is actually best known as a theorist of manga and an editor, but he's a very hands-on editor. So he's actually written novels and contributed the scripts for various manga, including Alice in a Department Store, which he worked on with Yumi Shirakura, and Kunio Matsuoka, The Yokai Slayer, which has only one chapter of Alice wherein Alice is adapted. But these came out in 1991 to 1992, and then again in 2006. So you can see that Otsuka is returning to Alice after quite a long time away from it. Just sort of a marker of how important it is. See, I mentioned Kyoko Okazane. Okay, the last one I wanted to go through individually is Shunji Iwai. Now you can see here the cover of his series, or one volume series, The Case of Hannah and Alice. This is a fascinating work. Shunji Iwai is actually a filmmaker, specifically a director in particular. He's won all sorts of awards, like the Fantasia Film Festival Award, the Best Asian Film at Fantasia Film Festival, sorry, the Busan International Film Festival's Audience Award. He's really incredibly successful. He's known for these very sort of thought-provoking, touching, emotional films. And he created this film called Hannah and Alice. I say that. He created a series of 6 commercials for Nestle's Kit Kat, all about these 2 girls named Hannah and Alice. And he really liked the vibe he had going. So then he got funding and he made a film with the same actresses, same characters, called Hannah and Alice. Okay, well, it wasn't really enough. He still felt like he needed more Alice in his life. So he then created a rotoscoped animated film, a prequel, because he couldn't, he wanted to continue using the same actresses, but they had gotten older, so they couldn't play their younger selves anymore. This was called The Case of Hannah and Alice. And I say that it's not really clear. This is the official English title. The Japanese is Hana to Ares Satsujin Jiken. Literally, it's more like the murder case of Hannah and Alice. So this seems like a very different direction from the gentle story of Hannah and Alice that came out of some Kit Kat commercials. But when the film was released, of course, this being Japanese media, we need to have it enshrined in other media. So the artist Domen Seimen creates the Case of Hannah and Alice in manga for us. There was also a novelization by the very hot author Otsuishi in the same year. All right, I wanted to talk a little bit about a group called CLAMP. I'll talk a little bit more about Koriyuki, and then I'll add in a few additional artists that are worth looking at. But CLAMP and Koriyuki, or CLAMP first. I mentioned, Koriyuki first, apparently. Alice in Murderland is her biggest series, but she has done all of the other ones that I mentioned earlier. They are fascinating. If you're interested in an Alice series by Yuki, Alice in Murderland is the way to go. CLAMP, on the other hand, it's not as obvious. They started off with this character, Miyuki-chan, who didn't really seem to have much to do with Alice, and she shows up in CLAMP School Detectives. But the way that they, early in their career, built out new series is that they would take a character who had shown up once or twice, maybe, in their earlier works, and then spin that character out into their own series. Miyuki gets the series Miyuki-chan in Wonderland. Fairly obvious that Miyuki-chan is now their Alice character. She falls into 7 different wonderlands over the course of the book's 7 different chapters, including wonderlands that are in fact the worlds of different series made by Clamp, such as X 1999, which itself was spun off of Tokyo Babylon, the book on the bottom. Simple enough, but Miyuki-chan becomes this sort of marker of moving across series and moving across media for Clamp. About 20 years after they've started this process, Miyuki-chan shows up in Tsubasa Reservoir Chronicles, the series with the 2 characters on the cover on the right in green. Here, different characters have been moving for the entirety of the series across different universes. And when Miyuki-chan shows up, it makes clear that the different universes within Tsubasa are tied to the different universes of the different Clamp manga. At the moment, Clamp currently has a series running, Cardcaptor Sakura Clear Card, that has now returned to Alice in another way entirely. And it's unclear exactly where they're going, but there is a new Alice in Wonderland book within the world of Cardcaptor Sakura. These are different manga that Clamp is connecting using Alice, but they also use Alice to connect different media. So for example, when they did an art book for Tokyo Babylon, they put the characters in outfits like the White Rabbit. They have them do tea parties for no apparent reason. It's not connected to the plot of the story at all. They just created additional new images with an Alice theme. So Miyuki-chan in particular, when Clamp wants to start moving into animation, they create a series. They create a pair of short videos called Clamp in Wonderland. And as you can see, Miyuki-chan is right here. The idea of these animations is together their various series. So all of these characters, each different color represents a character who's actually from a different series. And Miyuki-chan and her sort of race through their worlds links all of them together once again. Similarly, when Clamp joins Instagram, this is the first picture that they post. Poor Miyuki-chan falling through the sky. When one of the members of Clamp, Mokona, wants to create a book that is just about kimono and how to accessorize them and wear them, she includes a White Rabbit pin and some other Alice-themed accessories. Ultimately, what you see is that all of these artists are drawn to Alice for different reasons, but it functions to aid them in developing their artistic identities, creating new works, building up into different media, and just in general, showing how great they are at what they do. I wanted to add 4 final artists, Yu Watase, Jun Mochizuki, Aida Iro, and Yana Toboso. Not because I have a ton of time to talk about them, but because I think they're really interesting artists who may 10 years, 20 years down the road, be the sort that we would talk about and give their own sections to. And you can see their Alice series here, Alice the 19th, Pandora Hearts, Toilet Bound Hanako-kun, and Black Butler. We are running short on time, so I'll just say lastly, in terms of key genres, just to rush through it, mystery becomes really vital within Alice manga, as does the superhero genre, which is at times quite closely tied to mysteries in Japan. Fantasy for obvious reasons. And this is less a genre, but a style and a subculture on its own called Lolita. This is basically all the frills and fashion, in fact, that you can see in the bottom right-hand picture of Black Butler, as Yana Toboso is one of the main, is one of the big movers of Lolita into manga form. So there is really, we've just scratched the surface, but I hope you've gotten a sense that there is a wide variety of Alice manga out there. There are some really fascinating creators working in specifically Alice manga, and there are more coming out every single day. With that, thank you all very much for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Amanda. We've got some great audience questions here. Quick aside, I wanted to apologize to I was scrolling through our attendee list and I accidentally hit allow to talk on one person and I must have given you a heart attack. I apologize for that. Thank you for not talking and interrupting Amanda's presentation. So sorry about that. And I did want to mention there is a social hour directly following the presentation today. Will you be able to attend for a few minutes, Amanda? Or excellent. Okay. And everyone, I dropped the link to the email that contains a social hour Zoom link in the chat there, and I will do it again before we conclude. So Amanda, thank you so much. I work in the video game industry, and a lot of those people are really into comic books. And so now I just have some knowledge to drop into conversation next week at the water cooler. I'm very excited because, like I said, I'm very ignorant about this art form previously.
I mean, I've written a whole book on it, and I feel like there's still so many Alice manga that I just sort of, I've seen the cover. I know that it exists, and that's it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it's such a huge topic. My question, I'm really curious. Do you have a rough estimate as to the percentage of Alice manga that's Wonderland and versus Looking Glass? Are they about equal? Is it heavily in one direction? And again, a rough estimate, I know.
I'd have to say most of them don't directly adapt one of the two books or kind of mush the two together in the same way that people often mistake the Queen of Hearts for the Red Queen.
Right.
So there's a lot of that. And in fact, Koriyuki, the woman I mentioned, has done, I don't know, a dozen-ish adaptations of it on her own. And she made her graduation project from art school, an Alice-themed set of images, paintings, actually. She's even mushed together the Red Queen and the Queen of Hearts. And I feel like she has to know better. It's just, you know, that's what we do. So right. She did it.
And the general public is a lot more forgiving than, say, our audience here of things like that, combining. And I was also wondering, I mean, some of those magazines you showed were so violent, and I don't know if those even like fall into the horror genre, of which there is a large one. Is that a large percentage, the super violent ones, or is that just a tiny niche?
It's interesting. I wouldn't say either was the case.
Okay.
Yeah, like there are some. One I didn't mention today is Alice in Borderland, which it's been adapted into a TV series on Netflix. So quite a few people may be aware of it. That one's quite violent as well. And I mentioned that mainly because Koriyuki, her sort of brand as an artist is that she draws really grotesque stuff really prettily, like really prettily. She draws skeletons and you're like, oh, that's gross, but also very pretty, nicely done. So she's maybe a bit of she's a bit misleading. There's a lot of action, certainly, but in a lot of cases, like with Cardcaptor Sakura, there's action scenes, but it's like this little elementary school girl flying around the city after somebody else. It's not like people are, you know, getting beaten all bloody and everything.
And I know you mentioned, you know, so many titles, but I was so curious about Alice in a department store. Like what, how do you make a book out of that? I was imagining like a night at the museum thing. Is she stuck in there overnight?
That one, if I remember correctly, the Alice is the name of someone who works in the department store.
Okay.
But I have to admit, it's been a while.
No problem. Yeah, it was just one that jumped out at me. The other one that just gave me chills is when you talked about Alice's twin just being stuck in the mirror forever. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Terrible.
Yeah, that was one of the Koriyuki ones. She doesn't pull punches. Hers are very she goes for a bit of scariness, certainly.
Wow. Okay, we'll get to the audience questions here. We have a lot of them. Dieter is wondering, and he admits it's kind of a vague question, but what are other Western literature titles that are also very, very popular in manga adaptations? I know you mentioned Snow White at some point. Is that a big one?
Well, so one of the reasons that my work, focuses on Alice and why I wrote the book about Alice specifically is that there are certainly works that are adapted popularly in Japan. I mentioned Little Women, there's Anne of Green Gables, Snow White, any of the fairy tales, certainly. But in terms of number, variety, depth of adaptation, I haven't found anything that rivals Alice at all.
Interesting. All about Alice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that I go into it quite a bit in the book, which doesn't just deal with manga, but what it boils down to in part is that the whole idea of Alice going from world to world, that sense of liminality, coupled with the way that the Japanese media industry is developed to really require authors, artists, everyone to adapt, to cite, to bring in other people's works. And then, or to make their own works in other media. Alice, it's perfect for that. Like what Clamp is doing, where they join Instagram. They could have started off with any of their characters, any of their images. They went directly to Miyuki-chan, to Alice.
That's fascinating. Gabriella is wondering, is there a genre where you notice Alice popping up more than others in manga?
Quite a bit in mysteries, I've noticed. And I kind of separated out mysteries and superheroes when I was going through the genres, but really a lot of mysteries. There are a lot of series that have, technically you can say fantasy as well, but that's because there's a lot of sort of genre mixing. You know, you'll have a series like Count Kane or Black Butler that is at heart kind of a mystery series. The protagonists in both series, they run around trying to solve various mysteries. But there's also fantasy elements in it.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't necessarily say that fantasy is the main genre there.
That's interesting, because yeah, you would think that's where everyone's mind would go, but mysteries.
Yeah.
Wow. So Ryan Armstrong has a question, and I believe he submitted this when you had Hiroshi Nakamura was on the screen, and he is wondering, 1951 manga was the same year as Disney's Alice film. Was there an intentional overlap in timing, do you think?
That one, I don't think so. I'm trying to remember the year, but 1951 was actually not the year for Disney's Alice in Japan.
Oh.
The film was released, I want to say 52, but it might have been 53 in Japan. Now that said, I think there was a Disney Alice book translated that was released in Japan prior to the film itself, but I could be off on that one.
Interesting. Yeah, another question from Ryan. In the US, Alice is constantly remade into young adult novels. It's perfect for a coming of age action story. These are rarely dialogue heavy like the original, and many add love stories. I feel like this would happen in manga as well. Are there some common themes or tropes that you see across all these manga adaptations? I mean, you already mentioned the mysteries, but yeah, are there any, do they introduce romance a lot of the time?
Yeah, there are definitely, I mean, one of the things about that is that there are so many Alice manga that you can definitely see, for example, a group of Alice manga that have romance angles. Absolutely. But does that mean that they all do? No, they don't.
Right.
Likewise, you can see a group that have horror as a sort of central organizing characteristic. But again, you can see some that have nothing scary whatsoever about them. One thing that does tend to show up a fair bit are the sort of visual cues that you would think of, you know, the card suits, the Mad Hatter's hat, the teapots, the roses. Those are often used, and some of them, like flower imagery, that's pretty common, in particular in girls manga. Yeah, but it does, you know, that means it's really natural to put it in an Alice manga.
Absolutely. Thank you. Oh, Mark Burstein mentions, in your Nightletter article, there were a dozen or so manga available in English. Have there been any significant ones since that article appeared?
Since 2021, let me see, I've actually got a stack right here.
You just happen to have a stack.
There's one I'm actually not sure about yet. There's a series called Welcome Home Alice. I'm not entirely positive that should be attributed to Alice. The only reason I'm thinking maybe is because it has been it uses the name Arisu, Alice, that is pretty well established or has pretty well established ties to Alice in Wonderland in Japanese. it's not a native Japanese name, but it's about a young boy who goes away and moves out of his town. And when he comes back, he considers himself female, though he does not intend to go through reassignment surgery. Yeah, so
Topical,
yeah. And he calls himself Alice, or she calls herself Alice. Actually, I think he prefers he. It's a twisting sort of narrative of characters' development. So that's a new one. Some of them have been ongoing. So we have more issues of Black Butler, for example. But in terms of English language translations, I don't think, I mean, I know there are, but that's what comes to mind. Oh, actually, the Cardcaptor Sakura Clear Card. I don't think that was out in English in 2021.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, this year I became aware of, and I think it was published this year, maybe last year, the first non-binary Alice in a book. It was actually a Native American story of Alice in Wonderland, but the lead character is non-binary, which is cool to see. Now, oh, everyone, please remember, if you can, put the questions in the Q&A and not the chat, because they get lost really quickly. I think I already missed a few in there. Oh, a few people have asked for a reference list of all the artists. I don't know how much of a big ask that is. If you could maybe send me a quick one, I can put it on our social media later. I doubt you have it like right in front of you right now. But
yeah, I've been thinking I ought to make up one, because even in this presentation, there's no way I got them all. Just knowing the pictures that I showed earlier, there's various people I didn't say anything about. I just put a picture up and moved on.
Yeah, which, by the way, I'm sure you could have gone on much longer and no one would be complaining, but I appreciate you, trying to keep it tidy. John is wondering, do you know of a good overview on the history of manga or anime? My 14-year-old daughter would enjoy that in video or book form.
Yes, I do, and I'm trying to think of the name. If you know, there's a guy, C.J. Suzuki, the letters CJ, or Shige, he also spells it. He just co-wrote a book on manga, and it has manga in the title. So probably if you just look on Barnes & Noble for manga and Suzuki, S-U-Z-U-K-I, that one is fabulous, and it's meant to be accessible. There's some fabulous books that are meant for, other academics that I wouldn't necessarily recommend to your daughter offhand, but CJ's Suzuki's book is fabulous, and it's well worth a read. And he has some appendices at the back that say, these are the prominent artists. Some of the ones I mentioned today are listed in there with more information too.
Great. And on the topic of books, when will your book be available? We have several people asking that. And will it just be at University of Hawai'i Press, or will it be, Amazon, everywhere books are sold kind of thing?
I'm sure it's going to be on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and bookshop.org and all that. And it's available this July.
This July. Excellent. Cannot wait. Edward is wondering, apart from the 1951 adaptation you mentioned, most of the manga you mentioned use Alice as a starting point, a source for free inspiration. Are there many faithful adaptations, or are they simply comic books and BD and not manga?
So in terms of faithful adaptations, there are some. I have to admit, I pay a little less attention to them, in part because the audiences for them are a bit different. So if you think about I've seen some that are kind of like, classic stories for young readers kinds of things. I don't know that I would say, I mean, there are some certainly, and there's a decent number of them, but compared to the kinds of stories I was just talking about, there are far fewer. So this is, it's one of those things where people know it, and they know it well enough that they feel free to, take it in wild directions and really get inspired.
And that's always fun. I mean, I never get mad at any Alice adaptation. I know some people, when a movie comes out or a TV show, and they're like, what? There's not a genie in Alice in Wonderland? I'm like, why not? I feel like the characters belong to everybody now. All right. We have a few questions about the audience for these works. Is there a certain age range, or do people of all ages buy them? And also, are the majority of buyers girls, or do boys like them too?
Varies. Definitely there are Alice manga for boys. Some of the specific artists I went through talk about or are aimed at male readers. And let's see if I can show. Let me see if I can show this again. Then just to give you an idea. So you have, for example, these works that are aimed at younger girls. This one, Alice Poison, Aris Chudoku, or Alice Addict, sorry. This one is aimed at older, say teens to young adult women and men who are interested in the Lolita subculture, which is a sort of a style of fashion, but it's also kind of organized around the idea of like personal freedom of expression. As we move through, let's see, some of these, where is it? This is Alice in Borderlands, which is aimed at a male audience, as is Alice on Deadlines. Both of them are aimed at older male audiences. If I remember correctly, Pandora Hearts here and Boy Alice in Wonderland were aimed at younger male audiences. And I think 101st Alice here was aimed at an adult female audience. So you kind of have a fairly big spread. I think it's, there are, I think some that are aimed at a non-gendered, very young audience. I have to admit that's not an audience grouping that I have put very specific attention to. So I'm a little shaky on that one, but I'm pretty sure I've seen some.
Excellent. Yeah, that's fascinating that it's, you know, so many different age groups are targeted. That's interesting. And actually kind of, once again, reminds me of video games, brings me back to that, to my livelihood. Oh, and I wanted to mention, you know, besides Amanda speaking further at that USC conference next month, I believe someone is giving a talk on the Lolita culture. And I've heard her give a short talk on it before, and it's so fascinating because it's so hard for our Western brains to disentangle that from the Lolita we know, Namakan's Lolita, but it is so separate. Like most of these girls aren't even aware of that book, right? Who get into this culture, and it's just all about freedom of expression. So yeah, it's kind of tough to separate in our brains, but very different.
Well, one of the fun things about Lolita is that over time it sort of migrated, where the initial, like the central medium of it was clothing initially. And it feels like it's more manga and light novels today, actually. Yeah,
that's good to
know.
There's
a lot of crossover, but also Masafumi Monden will be talking at that conference. And he wrote a book on Alice fashion that goes into Lolita as well. And in particular, it goes into male Lolitas.
Interesting. All right. I don't want to, we have so many questions here. I don't want to leave too many out here. We're going to wrap up in a few minutes. Is there a lot of wordplay or poetic jokes in manga as the source material?
Less poetic jokes, but yeah, lots of wordplay. One of the fun things about Japanese is that you can write it various ways, the same word. I mean, there are these characters called kanji, Chinese characters. They have a meaning attached with them, but they also have multiple pronunciations. And then there are these two things called syllabaries, which are sort of like alphabets, but instead of one character representing a letter that you would put together with other letters to make a syllable, each one is a syllable in and of itself. Now, in Japanese publications, the way that they do it is, because this can get really out of hand with all the kanji out there, there's a set list that everyone's supposed to know, basically. Beyond that, if you want to use a more complicated word, like a professional, like specific to your field kind of word, they can publish the line of text with the reading in smaller text above for any kanji. And I guess it's really sort of a complicated explanation, but the thing of it is, what this means for manga, but also for literature, is that they start doing this thing where they'll have kanji that have one meaning, and then they'll write a different pronunciation over top. So they're playing with the meanings of words. And you see this also in Alice translations of Carroll's novels. But it's really common to have that. And in doing so, you can take words and make up new words. So you can take the idea of a vampire, but put in different kanji to sort of get a sense that this is a vampire who like drinks someone's soul instead of their blood or something like that.
Gotcha. Oh, that's fascinating. And you are handling these questions so well. I know they're like all over the place here. I don't really have time to group them into similar queries. Are politics ever remarked upon in Alice manga?
Not the ones that I have seen as much in a certain sense. You can get kind of commentaries on like government overreach to an extent, or, you know, the commentary in like Alice Book 1, which was kind of like, female artists know what they're doing, back off and stop telling them what to do. So you can definitely see that level of commentary, but I know when I've been in Britain, I've seen very pointed commentary at specific politicians, for example. I haven't seen that in Japan yet.
Gotcha. Interesting. Actually, this question is a perfect follow-up to that. When you talk about women saying, hey, we know what we're doing, back off. What were the restrictions that male editors inflicted upon artists?
So many. And in fairness, some artists, some of the male editors have also inflicted them on male artists, but to a lesser extent, a very markedly lesser extent. And they get wild. For example, there is I'm forgetting what series it comes from, but there's a commentary within a manga actually about this, where there's a character who is required to include a bear in every single series that they write because their editor really likes bears. And you know that's, you know, the story is fictional of that manga, but it's a thing that happens, absolutely. In point of fact, I was really happy when partway through my research, Koriyuki switched to a new publisher because I wasn't 100% sure. You know, I knew she liked Alice in Wonderland, but I wasn't 100% sure that there was Alice in almost everything she did because she liked it. I was a little worried that, you know, when it's that consistent for that long, it could be an editor creeping in. And so there is variation overall within the industry. There are some editors that are more laid back, but it's a very hands-on field. If you look at US comics, they're generally made by, you know, multiple people working together. You have someone doing inking, script, coloring. In Japan, you can have assistants, but it's really the manga artist who's driving the whole project. And that has evolved in particular in the 90s, I think, and you see editors taking a very strong hand where they're saying, let me help you develop the plot. Let me help you, you know, flesh out this character. Let me go take reference pictures for you because you're sending the characters to Karuizawa and you've never been there. So they can be incredibly active in driving forward different manga. It's difficult to tell from the outside though.
Yeah, I did not know that difference between Japanese comic books and American. In Japan, they're more of an auteur, I guess, have more control over the whole situation, or not control, but just take care of everything, right?
If you've got a good editor, yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. I want to end here with a few plugs. I just put a link in the chat to the USC conference, April 26th and 27th. I'm definitely going to have to take at least one day off of work for this. And it's open to the public, I believe. You just have to register. And again, it's called Encountering Alice in Japan. So anyone, any Southern California Carolians or anyone within a quick drive, I would definitely encourage you to attend this 2 full days of fascinating presentations. And I also wanted to give a quick plug for our spring conference next month, which is part academic conference, part film festival. It's going to be amazing. Of course, we're going to have great presentations from some people you know and love and some new faces, but we're also screening a few historic Alice movies that don't get seen very often and a brand new Hunting of the Snark. And the filmmaker, Simon Divison, will be here and he will be in conversation with Mark Richards. And I have seen this movie, I'm not kidding you, 5 times because he hides all these Carrollian references, like in almost every scene. Like you don't even know where to look. It's just absolutely amazing. And I don't want to give too much away, but we also, it's getting close. Pretty soon I can announce that we have unearthed a long lost Carrollian film from 1989. It's literally been sitting in a film canister for over 30 years in some dusty corner. I'm embellishing, it might be like Swifford regularly, I don't know, but it hasn't seen the light of day. Only a few people saw it in the late 80s in the UK. So I think that's what we're going to start our conference with. And once again, thank you so much, Dr. Amanda Kennell. I mean, everyone was so excited about this presentation and like so many great questions. So thank you to our attendees. And I'm vamping a little bit because I did want to put the social hour link one more time in the chat because I don't want anyone to be left out there. And again, everyone, this was in your email blast as well that came out this morning, anyone on our email list. But I will see you all in just a few moments. And yeah, Amanda will be there for at least a little while. So if anyone has any more questions, you can ask her in person. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Long time the mix and bogey song. Jabberwocky with eyes of flame came waving through the tulgey wood, and it burbled as it came, and it burbled as it burbled as it and burbled as it came. One, two, and through the vorpal blade went snake or snack. The vorpal blade went snake or snake or snack or snack.